Well, good afternoon. Welcome to everyone who is here, and thank you for coming. Grace and I are delighted that you could be here today, and she has told me that I am not to say a lot of great things about her, so I will not say a lot of great things about her, but I'm just pleased that she is going to tell us about her life. And so without any further delay, here is Grace Grote.
Well, listen, first I have to tell you something, and that is, I no longer fly blind. I take notes with me. So you gamble along with me, I hope. And I will have to say, though, that I'll begin the old-fashioned way. I was born in 1920 in Cincinnati, Ohio, and one of the things there was that at the age of 5, the smallest child in the first grade, I had hints of what my life was going to be. And the first one was that the teacher asked for a volunteer to stand up and tell what she had done during her summer vacation. And I volunteered, and I told the whole story, and the kids listened. Even the boys listened. And I loved doing it. I just loved doing it. And then the second thing was, I also loved the movies. And I would go every Saturday afternoon with my Aunt Annie, and we'd go up to the local theater. And here I have to tell you that in Cincinnati, this was like late 20s and early 30s. The movie often ran a silent film. And they were special because we loved the big cowboy star because he had his 6 shooters ready all the time. And then when the thing was over, the film was over, we'd walk outside and I'd get my hand out of Aunt Annie's and I charge up Ludlow Avenue with my 6 guns blazing. And I loved that too. And I loved both those things all the way through grade school, high school, college, and even when I worked in a little theater in Cincinnati, which was called the Train Station Players, because we played in an old remodeled movie theater down there. Well, it was not a big movie, it was just a little bit. And there we did everything, and I just enjoyed it enormously. And I knew quite truly that I was going always to be a talker and an actor. And I tell you, that acting thing was a bug. And I kept at it, and I kept at it, and I kept at it, and nobody approved but me. And finally, time went on, you know, and all at once I'm getting into my 21st year. And I think it's high time that I go. So I went around, I started to say goodbye to my friends and all, and I looked up my old college professor. And he said to me, I know what you want to do, Grace, but don't do it. He said, I did it when I was young and it was terrible. He said, do you know that there are 1,000 people every year from all over who storm into New York and they want to be famous and rich on the stage there? And he said, they never make it. He said, it is, just don't do it. And I said, well, I'm not going to be famous. I said, what I like to do is I love to make those characters. And I said, little ones or big ones or whatever they are, I try to bring life into them and send them out there someplace. And he said, yeah, I know. He said, but it's bad. He said, it's really bad. He said, you'll wear out your shoe leather going around to agents and producers and backstage, or even every little old hellhole that is promised to cast a play. He said, it's not good. He said, I have to tell you this. He said, no matter how carefully you plan, at some point you're going to scratch and starve. Now, don't go. So I thanked him, and I went. And I don't know about that $1,000 figure, but I do know that he had everything down right. Those first 6 months, kids. I did wear my shoe leather down, and I have to say that when you went around the grounds in New York, like he was talking, very often the biggest offices, and once in a while, a very big person in that office, were always usually very polite, very kind. But mostly you ran into the secretary who said nothing to do and didn't look at you as she said it. So it wasn't easy, but of all the miracles, I got a job. And this, however, was a very small job. It was on Off-Broadway Theater, 48th Street. And those people were doing a little tiny play out there. And they had made some kind of a deal with Actors' Equity that whoever did that play would get a very small money, but they would get membership in Actors' Equity. Now, as most of you know, Actors' Equity is the union, and this was the promised land. So I got the job, a mean landlady in this little play, and when it was over, it was a real bomb, and I was union. I strutted around for a little while until it dawned on me that you could be just as hungry inside Equity as you could outside. So it wasn't easy, but in the meanwhile, I had fallen in love with New York. And in those days, late 20s, early 30s, and so forth, there were lots of things that were very cheap in New York. For one thing, for a nickel, you could go on the subway all over the island. And for very little money, you could go up the Hudson River and back, and you could go to Staten Island, and you could go to 3 different zoos, and you could go and go and go, and not for very much money. And it was such fun. And it was such an education. Hey, it was. And one of the greatest things was that the ethnic food was often not very expensive. And I ate very good Chinese, Indian, Italian, all over the place. And sometimes with the other girls who lived in the girls' club where I did now, we would go down to Greenwich Village on Friday night, and we would go into one of those candle-lit cellar cafes, and we'd drink beer, and we'd talk it all over. And that was fun, except that, of course, we still had to find a job to eat and pay the rent. So these were often called odd jobs, and let me tell you, some of them were pretty odd. And I'll tell you only two of them real quick, you know. One, the first, I worked for $1 a night for the Metropolitan Opera Company. And I played an Egyptian slave, I played an urchin in paradise. I say paradise, I should say Paris, interchangeable they were. And also, I was an old lady in a mob. I had all kinds of parts. For every opera, a different part. So, time came, a day between the rehearsal and the performance, and I would take hold of that part, and not in any deep way, of course, but I would mold it to be a person. I gave it some kind of character. And then when the time came and I got on the stage at the Metropolitan, I had to play that inside myself, but I found it very satisfying and very, educational. And of course, you had to be very careful also that you could not intrude into the story with this thing I had made, because supers in the opera were a kind of human scenery. You could not interfere into the plot. However, I got a great deal of satisfaction of working on that thing inside myself and living with it while I did what was necessary on the stage. Well, it was such fun. At the Metropolitan, I found a very amusing place. And then I thought, $1 a night, kids. I quit. And I went to another job. And this one was at the top of the Empire State Building. And I went there the first day, and I went up. The offices were on a level just under where that fancy part is at the top. And I was, I have to say, it was my first sight of all of New York from the top. And most of you know that's a real thing to see. But I also saw, way down below, those little bitty automobiles and buses going along, down, 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 on Fifth Avenue. Nonetheless, I sit at the typewriter, and after a little while, one of the other girls in the office comes up to me and says, "We think it's only fair to tell you that, well, you know how it is that we are. We're right up here," she said, "right under the fancy stuff." And she says, "Up here, well, the truth is that when we get a big wind up here, and we're up here like this, the building tilts." Oh. By nightfall, I had quit. And I went to the Hudson Theater over on 44th Street on Broadway. And this was quite a move. It was. I loved something over there in very short order. I did. This was an old play, but it was funny. It was a comedy, and it had in it a part that I absolutely lusted to play. It was a Mexican maid, and she was in and out of almost every scene, and she was so funny. She was just wonderful, and I wanted to play that part. So after I've been ushering, say, for maybe almost 2 weeks, I went backstage and to the stage manager, And I told him that I knew that part, and I would like to have it when the show went on the road. And he didn't promise me anything, but it was very nice. And we chatted, and I went away, and now I should reassure you, I did know that part. Because when you're ushering, if you decide to see the show every night, and in very short order, you know the part. It just sinks in. So I'm up there, I'm doing this maybe, I don't know, 3-4 months, and the word comes out, it's going on the road. I rush backstage, and he turns to me and he says, "You'll get right down to Broadway into the Leventhal office. He has your contract." What? This is a big, long-term Broadway play, and I'm a nobody, and I'm in there without an audition. I hardly knew what to say, but I did know what to do. I rushed right back down to Broadway. But in the meantime, I have to say that I'm going to stop telling you for a minute, because maybe it's not important, but sometimes I think the truth of something really ought to be said. And the truth here was that Broadway, the West End, that in the movies was a very happy place. A lot of tap dancing and success, you know? And in real life, it was a zoo. The prostitutes walked the streets in their costumes, and there were a number of very old theaters over here. And most of them had that old-time decoration up on the roof. But it was dirty and broken and falling apart. And many of those theaters were running porn films. It was just such a mess. In fact, they even had a flea circus there. And it was just shocking, really. But there was a part of this that was part of New York culture at that time, and the culture was, if you couldn't do something about problem like Broadway there, and like maybe plans for something that didn't work out, or a building that didn't hold up right, the word was the town could do nothing about it because the mob owned that property. Now, whether the mob really and truly owned all they said they owned, I don't know. But that was the culture at the time. If it didn't work, it was the mob that had hold of it. Well, anyway, I went on with it anyhow, you know. First thing you know, I'm in rehearsal, and the next thing you know, I'm on the road. And kids, I want to tell you, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. It was wonderful. We played every night and 2 matinees a week, all excepting Sunday. And it was just wonderful. It was so satisfying. And I did that part, and I did it well, and we got good reviews, and we got good money, and it was just fine. And then around the beginning of the autumn, the show closed. And now I'm living back in a slum. It's on the 3rd Avenue in New York, and the L went by the front windows every few minutes, and it sort of killed the conversation. But there I was, you know, and I did what every other actor that moved into a place like that. I bought beer had a neighborhood painting party. And we painted it, and even some of those actors and writers and people who lived like this would decorate the places, and some of them got quite artistic. Wretched furniture, you know, wretched. But all kind of fancy stuff they did. So what I did, I took 2 orange crates and used them for side tables. And then I painted the outside and I put bright colored paper inside. And I lived there contentedly for quite a while. I felt that I was part of the Bohème. However, I had a stroke of luck. I got another show. And this one was quite different, because this was going to be only 2 nights, and it was a money raiser for the children of Israel. And I thought that was a very good thing to do. But in the meantime, another thing was very good about it. And that was that I got the lead, the girl who got the boy. And in the past, I had never, ever gotten that before. I think I did some growing up on the road and in those early days in New York, and I wasn't such a skinny nothing as I was in the beginning. I had sort of matured into a real nice-looking girl, you know? And so that was good. And the other thing was that it sort of eased the past for me in this way. During those early years, I was being turned down all the time, here and there, everywhere. But one time I went to something called a cattle call, and this was all the equity actors that didn't have jobs could go to the meeting place and be interviewed. Well, I went up to the top of the Schubert Theater one time to a big room and sat all around in chairs. And there I saw a woman I knew. She had been a dancer for Schubert, but now she was a casting director. And she came to me sitting in my chair, and I'll tell you what she said, but you know, I'm not going to quote it exactly, because she said, blankety blank blank Grace, I know you're a good actress, but you don't look like anything. Well, I wasn't insulted. I knew what she meant. When they cast anything, usually the first line of attack is get somebody who looks like the part that you're trying to cast. If you need a young girl that gets the boy, you get young girls. If you need a leading lady, you get somebody with some pizzazz and stature, you know. You fit the new body to whatever you're looking to fill. So that was pretty satisfying. I was now okay for leading girls. I didn't ever get many, but I was okay for them. And then I also had another good thing about this show. 2 nights, good money, all that. But we played in Carnegie Hall. And it was so big, and I went one time early to rehearsal, and I walked out on that empty stage, and I looked up at that big, beautiful house. I almost flew. It was just wonderful. So we played our 2 nights, and we got good reviews, and we all got paid good, and I went back to the slum. And now, pretty soon, it came on Christmas, and I went home to Cincinnati for the holiday. And while I was there, I had a call from the woman who really had an option on the slum that we lived in. And she was English. And she called me and she said, Grace, I have to tell you that you know that big chair you always like to sit in the living room? Well, the ceiling fell on it. She said, it is going to be very expensive to clean it up, and I shall expect you to send me some money. Well, all right, I sent some money, what they thought, and I never went back to the slum. I went to the exact opposite. I went to Gramercy Park, and many of you probably know that Gramercy Park at one time was one of the most exclusive pieces of real estate in all of New York, and it was beautiful. It had iron fence around it and flowers, and rich people lived there. But now, it had aged along with everything else, and we had rooms being rented out. And strangely enough, they were not exorbitantly expensive. They were just somewhere waffling around in the middle. And I thought, having had a couple of jobs, I was very hopeful. I could probably, maybe swing it. So, just to give you a little peek into it, we had a living room with antique furniture, we had a fireplace, and we had a bear rug in front of the fireplace. It was terrific, and one night, something different. I came home, and there was a police car pulling away from the door. And I went inside, and all the other girls that were doing that floor there were sitting there and looking sick. And I said, what's the matter? And one of them said, well, you know that kid, the new kid that's living up on the 3rd floor? And I said, she tried to commit suicide tonight. And we had to send for the police and the ambulance, and we sent her over to Bellevue, and she's not coming back. And I thought, suicide? I never entertained such a thought. But I thought about it all the same now. And I said, well, that's suicide. And then one of the other girls pitched right in and she said, sure, why not? She said, she couldn't get a job any more than we could. Huh? Heads up. Time went by, surprisingly. Within about 4 months, I had a call from a Cincinnati friend who now, not in the theater, but was living in New York. And she knew all of us who had worked in the train station theater, and I knew her. And I had a call from her one day, and she said, Grace, I know that we have to talk about this now. We have to talk about Ray. And my heart gave a little clue, you know, because Ray was a beautiful, beautiful hunk. And I had played with him in Cincinnati in the train station players. And there was no personal thing much, but it was frequently in the theater. There is not always. we knew each other, you know. And sometimes when people talked about something like this, like Ray, they had to factor in who he was. And he really was a very good actor, a disciplined man. And he worked around Ohio and those states in the middle, and I knew that now he was in New York and he was trying to break into the theater also. So I didn't right away say anything, but I was thinking inside myself, she had said Ray, and I said to myself, Ray, go ahead, talk about Ray. And she said, they found his body in the East River this morning. And after a while, she and I went to see the woman that he had been sleeping with. And she said she thought what had happened was, of course, he was very distraught, she said, very broken up, because he, with all his qualifications, his personal beauty and his professional command, all of that, he could not get a job either. And he was just desperate about it. And she said, she thought he walked out in the middle of the night, and she was on the East Coast, right by the East River. And she said he probably just walked down the river, and she said maybe he fell in and maybe he jumped in. And after a bit, we all said not too much, but we knew that there was a criminal element loose always in that city. And from that moment on, I would have to say that something of the sense I had of being involved in a great adventure was not there anymore. And I knew without even, it was just in me, I knew that there was a hard layer, merciless and dangerous, under that city. And I knew that we would never find out what happened, that New York closed over Ray like the water did. Well, came summer, and for some reason I could not get a job. There was no stock, there was no dinner theater, there was nothing. And so I went north to a children's camp where I would be directing the children's plays, the things they did. And when I signed the contract, the owner said to me, now you understand, he said, that the people who send her children here are very wealthy people, and they will tolerate nothing second rate. So he said, bear in mind, if you should come up with any performance for them or anybody that is associated with you, and it is not top drawer, you will go back to New York. Right? And he said, now I'll tell you something else. He said, when we started this place, there was a very remarkable young man, and he took over the empty barn on the property, and he said he made an acceptable camp theater out of it. He said he put in lights and sound and all kinds of technical things. He had a great taste and a great skill in technical theater. And he said he really made a terrific camp theater out of it. And he said, he's going to be your partner. And he said, I want you to go down to Fifth Avenue tonight, Lower Fifth, He said, you know the big meeting room down there in that building? Yes, he said, you go down there and you meet him there tonight. So that night, I went down to Lower Fifth Avenue. I went to this big meeting room. All the people that were going to be in that theater, in that camp, were there. And the girl that was to take me to this wonder worker in the theater, she met me, and she looked at me, and then she said, wait till Don Grote sees this. And when he saw me, he said and looked like anything that any of the rest of us good people would have thought, sensible people. He looked at me as if he had found a roach on his plate. He was expecting somebody else. Nonetheless, 2 days before the 4th of July, I'm up on the hill in the camp. I'm in that big empty barn place that he converted. And the door opens and in he comes. And I have to say that Donald was a heavy man, but he was very well muscled. And he had an enormous strength, and he moved lightly, moved very swiftly and efficiently. So he looks at me and he says, where are your kids? And I said, I sent for them, but they didn't come. I said, I guess I have to go to the head counselor. He said, no, I'll go. And out he went. Well, a long time later, I happened to find out from some people that he went down to the boys' head counselor, the girls' head counselor, and he raised Holy Happy Hannah. And in no time, he was back up in the theater, and he said, brought 2 big, tall waiter boys with him. And he said, they have good voices. He said, they'll do. And I was kind of steaming. I didn't like how it had been handled at all. And so I went over to him and I said, Donald, we can't do this. This is impossible. I said, you can't do this. I said, we have not really a full day of rehearsal. I said, nobody can do a respectable piece of work, a top quality piece of work in that time. I said, we just can't do it. And he looked down at me with calm brown eyes and he said, they do it this way every year. And our eyes met, and there was a quiet. And I heard myself say, we'll have to work very hard. And we did. The first thing he did I thought was brilliant. He said, we're changing the place where this is supposed to take place, he said. We're going to put it in a radio studio. And he put out a table and a couple of chairs and a microphone, and he said, that way, these kids won't have to learn any parts. He said, they can read everything, you know, radio type style. And I thought it really was a very good idea, given the circumstances. But then he went to work, and he was something to see. He was very quiet, he was very exacting. He knew exactly what he was doing. He covered all the territory, even the lights, the sound, everything. And in the meantime, I'm stuck with these 2 kids. And these boys were at an age where they didn't really walk. They shambled. And I had to teach them to stand up straight, walk straight onto the stage, walk straight off the stage, sit straight while you're on the stage, and talk straight. And I worked at them, and I worked at them, and I worked at them, and also what this 4th of July play meant. I didn't know, it was so intense, and yet along the way, Donald would help me out. He got the costumes, the straw hats, the ties, he got everything. He brought in the musicians from the camp, and he even got me a bugle player. And on we went at almost no time. It was 4th of July night, 7 o'clock, and I am standing backstage on this side with a dry mouth and sick stomach. And he's on the other side, turning on the lights and pulling the curtain. And we did that terrible thing. And at the end of it, all us kids in the audience applauded and they hollered and they stamped. And I sneaked a look over at the manager and he was beaming. And I thought, we did this awful thing. We did it, and we got away with it. And I knew that I could never have done it without Donald. So the kids, of course, everybody stormed outside to see the 4th of July fireworks. And Donald and I are alone on the empty stage. And I hurried over to thank him. And as I did that, he opened his arms. And we were married 19 years. Well, I forgot about equity, and we bought some property in a small town in New Jersey. It was not too far from where he had his regular job. Donald was a teacher of science in Bloomfield High School. So we've got this nice property with a snug little house on it, and we had other good things about it. Not far away, there was a good civic theater. It wasn't union, but it was very well funded, and it was decently run by some middle-aged people who had been theater nuts like me, and they knew what to do and how to do it, and they had daring. They did everything and anything. And I got more experience there than I had in many another place. I had always played some Shakespeare. Here I played a lot of Shakespeare and directed, and I played ancient Greek theater, and I directed, and I played all kinds of stuff. There we played detective plays and love plays and sex plays and protest plays even we played. And he also worked there at night, you know. But two of us also worked that summer theater camp thing. Well, meanwhile, I'm saying to myself, this is really lovely up here. This is just fine. And one of the best parts of it was that we would go at night up to the top of our place, you know, the hill, and we would walk in the moonlight. The thing about it was that this property was 3 sides woods and 1 side neighbors. Now the neighbors were down over there across the street. But the woods, the 3 sides, one side, right at the edge of the property up there, fell in a steep slope down into a deep wooded valley. And many of those nights when we walked around the top of the thing, and we looked down in the valley, and it was moonlight, and we were alone usually up there, and it was so nice. And then one night when we were walking around up there, we turned into our driveway and something happened. Out of that valley, there came a howl, shivery thing. What was that? Huh? Nothing. Went back, got into bed, and bed was by the steep slope, and we were just about falling asleep when out of the valley, well, next morning, Donald goes to work, to the school, and he consulted his colleagues, and one of them, a woman, said, I think it was a mating call, and that was very likely a fox. And when Donald came home that day and told me what she said, I said, fox, schmucks. This is a mystery. And I sat down and I wrote an outline for a Hardy Boys mystery story, and I sent it to the Stratemeyer Syndicate, which was the company that published Hardy's, Nancy Drew, all those series books. And they bought it. And they bought me. And I worked for them for 13 wonderful years. So things changed. Of course, I was no longer, when I worked the camp, even though I had come to enjoy it. And I did some writing in the past, so I was quite able, with this new job, to write the Bobbsey twins, and to do some editing and everything that had to be done with a book company, including, wonderfully, travel. Oh, travel. I went all over the United States and parts of Canada and parts of Mexico, and the idea was to seek out places that would be good mystery-type places for these stories. And at the same time, I had to take pictures and make notes and be sure that any place that we chose had, well, it had not only what we're looking for, it had other things. And those things were natural to the place, or they had to do with the real world that we lived in. So the natural stuff and the everyday life of those places. I had to take the pictures and keep the notes, and we had to be, whatever we did in the stories, that stuff had to be accurate. Well, I tell you, it was really a wonderful time in our lives. We both worked at times in theater. I wrote the Bobbsey twins and did all this stuff, the traveling. And it went the way my mother used to sometimes say when she had a lot of things to do. And she would say, and she'd say, I was busier than a switch engine. And we were pretty busy. They were very good years, really good years, but somewhere along the line, something happened, of course. I didn't walk the camp, but I went there on weekends to visit Donald. And it is summer, and we've been at this top of the hill thing for a long time now, so we're pretty comfortable there. And the night before a program of any kind, I would go up to camp to stay with Donald for the weekend. And this time, I'm packing things up. It's about 11 o'clock at night, and phone rings, and it is the owner of the camp, and he says to me that Donald had dropped dead outside the camp office. Well, I don't know. What do you do? What? Well, I had a lot of friends, and everybody pitched in, and I did what had to be done. And of course, it was a shock. It was very lonely, and somewhere along the line, I went back and I joined Equity again. And then there was a group of theaters. They were in Montclair, New Jersey. It was a kind of a community of off-Broadway theaters, and also tryout places. And the Summer Fun Company, which I had worked for in the past, called me and asked me to come down and do a couple of plays there. And so, of course, I went. And same time, not too long afterward, I played Daisy in Driving Miss Daisy, because Driving Miss Daisy had closed on Broadway, and the Summer Fun had got the contract to do the first out of New York performance. Well, it wasn't perfect, you know, but it took my mind away from what was on it. And then, of course, a little bit down the street, Olympia Dukakis had her own theater, which was called the Whole Theater. And I went down to see her, and she hired me for some maid and a housekeeper or so for the summer. And then, I don't know, I went home every night to the Hill, but those theaters there were kind of my support, my medicine while this shock was moving through me. And eventually, however, Olympia had to go back to Hollywood because they were going to have the big Oscar ceremony, and she had to get her statues and all, and it petered out. So I went back up to the Hill to live, and oh, it was so bleak. It was so empty, you know. And I went down to the town, to the shelter, and I adopted a little French poodle, a little black, elderly little dog, a miniature. And I brought her home, and she turned out to be quite dependent. She liked to come up to me and rest on my leg, and she liked to sit on my lap. And I liked to be close to her, and together we sort of coped with the empty hill. Now, there was another element to this, and that was that whenever anything happened up there, like the time the hickory tree fell down and there was water in the cellar another time and the car died, well, Donald did all that stuff with one hand behind him. And I couldn't do any of it. I was just no good with it. And I started to worry about it. I started to think, you know, I shouldn't be here, I'd say to myself. I ought to be living someplace where there are people that could help me out. And over and over and over the question, because in between I didn't want to move. This place was my nest, my shelter, where I'd been easy and happy and successful. And now it was constantly, should I move? Yes, no, maybe not. It's your nest. What do you do? And the dog is huddling close. And then one winter day, I had a call from a boy who was now 17. A little boy used to be Danny across the street. Excuse me, Danny says, Mrs. Grote, you have a wall of ice in front of your driveway and we can't get a shovel into it. He said, you're going to call the town and get the machinery. So I did that. And after a while, I walked out into our driveway. We were tumbled down in the snow, and it was just white everywhere, you know, beautiful. And Danny is at the top of an embankment on the side of our driveway. And he says to me, Mrs. Grote, lie down on the embankment and put your arms out like this. And I did that. And then he took me by the wrist and he hauled me out like a leg, a piece of wood. And he set me on my feet, he took me out the road. The inspector was there. Yes, we could have the machinery. I went back to the embankment, and he's gone. Danny's gone. And I lie down on my back, and I shoot back down in the driveway, and I toddled into the house, and I stand there dripping, and for the first time in a long time, I talk to myself. Cold turkey. And I said, you're getting too old for this stuff. And when the spring came, I and Noel, we got into our Honda and we went exploring, and I bought a house here in Venice. Well, I expected a lot of theater, but what I got was a lot of pains in the leg and a very bad knee. So I drove down, if you will believe, 8:30 in the morning appointment with a specialist. And he said, yes, I was in good health, and yes, the arthritis was bad, and certainly, yes, there should be surgery on the knee. And I said, no. And I drove back into the main street of the town, and it was a long tunnel, gray tunnel. And meantime, the sky was gray, getting blacker by the minute. And there was nothing stirring. It was just still. And over on this side, there were about 3 old-fashioned gray frame, you might know, houses with a big square roof thing that fit up over the big square old-fashioned porch with the railing around it. But nothing, not a movement. However, there is something. There is a newspaper box right next to that first big gray house. And I say to myself, I'm going to get a paper, I'm going to get out of this place and find a good, nice breakfast place. So I park the car, I come over, I stand in front of that box, and by now the umbrella is on a cord around my wrist. And I am sheltering in my arm here, away from the little tiny raindrops I am sheltering a beautiful new thing I bought myself. It was a red leather pocketbook, and it had a long red leather string that came out you could put over, over your shoulder. And so I fished the money out of the box. It was 35 cents. And I put it in the box, and the box opened, and I reached in and I pulled out that paper, and the box closed on my red leather string. I yanked, and it wouldn't come. And I yanked it again, and it wouldn't come. And I yanked 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 and I pulled and I beat it on the top and I beat it on the side and I kicked at it and I did everything I could possibly think of, and the thing wouldn't open. But the sky opened. The sky dropped a torrent of rain down on me, drowning torrent. And I stood there and just beating and hollering and pushing. And by this time, the umbrella is rolling on the ground. I'm stumbling over the umbrella. Finally, I went out into the street and I called up at those houses. I thought maybe somebody was in there. Somebody would come out. I could get a scissors or something and cut myself loose, because I was tethered to that newspaper box with my purse. Well, after a while, I thought I'd get back in the car, and then a voice, I had an inner voice. We all have an inner voice. But mine was often very active. And this time it said, "Go back and try again, dummy." So I went back, and I stooped down, and I grabbed that purse, and I gave it everything I could, and it opened a sliver. And I pulled that cord out, shut the box, and I stood shaking, drenched, drowned, and free at last. Well, I got in the car, threw everything in the back, and I was just closing the driver's side door when that end house, that big gray house, the front door opened, and out came a big, old, very old man. And he had bald head except for a few limp white hairs and a weazened old face. And he came to that railing and he looked down at me and he said, "You had a lot of trouble up there, didn't you?" He said, "I've been watching you." Well, 1 hour later, my kitchen, my kimono, my hot pot of coffee, and I think, as I sometimes think, that I hear Donald say, "You can't do anything about it, just forget about it, forget about it." And I, with my little voice, straightened up and I said to myself, I can try to fix it. And I set to work and I wrote that story. And then I began to write. And I wrote, 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 and I wrote. I must have had 5 good, tight stories, funny stories about old people or any kind of people who were running up against all kind of Nazi stuff in the world that we lived in. And then I also sent it as a column called Old Lady at Large to the Herald Tribune. And do you know they bought it? They bought it. And it came with a big entertainment package piece, which was called Florida West, I think. Yeah, Florida West. And I was on that Florida West front page every other Sunday with my picture and my story, and I tell you kids, it was such fun. I was just a little bitty celebrity in a little bitty town, but it was just great, and I wrote, I wrote and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. I had a wonderful time, and people gave me jobs like talking to groups and all, and with it all, I had, I just had a wonderful time. I had fan mail, I had everything. And meantime, the time goes by, it's a great thing, it's 3 years, and one morning, my editor his voice was on my computer, and he said, "They fired me, and you too, I think." Oh. What? How could they do it? I mean, this was a wonderful thing. It was very popular. We had everything. We had food, we had travel, we had how-to columns, we had pictures, and we had kids for the stories and everything for the kids. It was just great. And those button counter bookkeepers in the newspaper threw it out. Every last word of it out. Well, I wait, and I wait, and I wait, and then all at once I realized that there was a kind of afterglow, and people still remembered me, and they called. And you know, my life had opened out so much, it had blossomed so much. And now some of that was still working and rocking there. But also, Noelle was getting very much older, you might say. She was, I don't know what to call it. It was like she didn't know where she was all the time. And she didn't eat very good, and she slept a lot, and she continued to cuddle up, and I cuddled her. And finally I said to myself, why don't I try to do something about this for myself? And I had a pool, but I hadn't been in that pool for quite a long time. So I got dressed, I went out, I went in the pool, tried to swim, sank like a stone. And I tried again and sank, and again and sank. It went on several times, and finally I had to recognize, really for the first time, recognize in this house now where I am, that I am too old now to swim. I have forgotten how to swim. I didn't know you could forget how to swim. And so I also faced, finally, the fact that I had avoided all along about old and age and all of that, you know. I was in my 90s, and I could hardly believe it, because all along my whole life through, I hardly ever paid any attention to clocking the years. I did what I did. I was busy. If I wasn't busy with something, I was worrying about something. something, like whether you should stay in the house or go, or stay in the house or go. All of that came back, stay in the house or go, and also the knowledge that I didn't have much time to make any decisions. So I went out, I hired a dog walker for Noel, and I got a walker for myself, and I feasted every morning when the dog walker came. I had all kinds of good food, everything we wanted to eat for breakfast. Good for you, not good for you, made no difference. We ate it, we enjoyed it, and always we had pastry and bacon. And she was fun, she was nice, and she would come and bring her dog too. So this morning feasting went on for maybe a year or so. And of course the little dogs got their proper food, but they also reported to the coffee table and took their treats, especially the bacon. However, they didn't do that every time because she had now and then a day off. And one time, when she had a day off, I slept late and I got up very slowly, and I managed to hobble out of bed and get upright and start moving, and I could see that Noelle was curled at the foot of the bed the way she always was. And when I got over and stooped over to say good morning, I saw she was gone. She was still warm. And then, for the first time, all the mental stuff of go, stay, this, good, bad, all that tangled stuff quieted down. And Noelle had given me a gift. A couple of days later, I called Village on the Isle to negotiate a place to stay. And as many of you know, I do live there. And the people are very kind, and the place is warm and safe, and everything you would want. And along with it, what is very nice, they give me opportunities to recite and to do little programs and things. And I, most of the time, however, sit in my big chair and just kind of drift and look back at the memories, the good ones, the bad ones, everything. And I am keenly aware of the thank you that I owe so many people for the kindness that had been shown me over the years. And I want to say now, today, to every one of you here, every one of you, everyone, thank you for coming today and taking the time and the trouble to listen. And I also want to thank those people who helped to put this all together, and especially Beverly, because, well, you know Beverly, she is a good talker and she's a good performer, and she has always had the gift of working with tiny little things just the right way, and the first thing you know, they grow, and she has got a project. and it works. So I almost can't thank her enough for bringing us all together today. And that reminds me that I have to tell you once again what she told you, and that is that if you want to say anything, the floor is open, and it is open.
So what Grace means when she says the floor is open, that you may ask questions, but I will bring the mic around. So have a seat and we'll see what happens. Marilyn?
Well, Grace, I'm glad that you mentioned the article in the Herald Tribune, because I remember that very fondly too. And I remember the one that you wrote about the art exhibit that we went to, where we saw the man who painted with spaghetti sauce and chocolate sauce. Do you remember that one?
I don't know what you're saying. I can't hear it.
I'm sorry. Well, anyway, the end of the story was that Grace asked Chuck what he thought of it, because he'd been walking around with his book. And he said, I think his mother should have told him not to play with his food. And I thought that was really cute. You put that in the column.
Any other questions? Fran?
I don't have a question, but I just want Grace to know that she has given so much to all of us who know her, and we should be thanking her.
Picking up on that thought, I want to thank you for the Hardy Boys, because more than I knew, at least at the time, they contributed to my love of books. And I used to read them one right after another, and then I would read the Tom Swift books, which we also talked about. I think your husband had something to do with that. So I thank you for the Hardy Boys.
Grace, would you like to tell them what Donald did for the Tom Swift books?
What Donald did?
For the Tom Swift books.
Oh, yes, I do want to tell you that. He came home one day and he said, I've had an adventure. And I said, what is that? And he said, now he's working for a school as a science teacher. And he said, I had a note in my box today to go to a place over in East Orange. And he said, I went, and he said it was an old building, one of those not so good buildings in East Orange, and East Orange was on the edge of going to go down, you know. And he said, I went into this old building, and he said, and there was one of those antique elevators, all the iron bars and everything. He said, and I went up to the top floor with an old man running the elevator, and he said, I got up there, and the old guy points me down the hall, and he said, I went down, and then I went, as he said, the other way, and he said, and then over there, these are all secretaries sitting there with big typewriters. All over there, he said, is a small office, wall-to-wall syndicate books, powder blue rug on the floor, beautiful carved desk, and sitting at the desk was a very old woman in beautiful clothes, wearing a hat. And that was Harriet Stratemeyer Adams. She was the daughter of the founder of the company, and she had at his death taken it over and run it for many years, especially the Nancy Drew part. And now she had a job for Donald. She said, I am looking for a science teacher who has imagination. And she said, you were recommended. Well, you know, the school, everybody knew what Donald was doing in the summer. So he had that reputation of being partly theater and partly school. So she says, you can invent as fabulously as you want to invent, but she said, it must be scientifically accurate. Now, this was very critical for a kind of sad and funny reason at the same time. Way back when they invented the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew and all of that, somebody very unwisely put the Hardy Boys on a deserted island where it was infested with poisonous black snakes. Well, the book went out and the letters came in and the kids and the teachers and the parents and anybody who had any sense at all wrote in and said, you dummies, there's no such thing as a poisonous black snake. So they had to take the books back, and from that time on, one of the things that the company did was to clean up the old books. If you wrote a new book for the syndicate, you also had to clean up an old one so that there was nothing old-fashioned or embarrassing in there. And also, you had to redo any book, not just fix one up, but redo any book that needed the plot jazzed up or anything like that. So Donald gets the job that he is to invent the inventions for Tom Swift Jr., the boy inventor in the books. And Donald sits at the dining room table many a night and he is inventing these inventions. It was a great job. It was an extra job and it was a lot of fun. And I was always tickled, you know, that both of us were working for the syndicate at the same time. He was a very talented and very versatile man. That was that. Yes, the syndicate was a very, very fruitful place and very busy place. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Kim?
Grace,
Yeah.
Kim.
I wonder, because there seems to be so much talk nowadays about people and keeping your thoughts collected and knowing how to communicate internally a little with yourself about journaling and writing. In all of your time writing, did you ever write personal journals just for yourself?
I'm going to ask for the ears over here.
Did you ever write personal journals for yourself?
No, I was a very poor record keeper. To this day, I only found one. Of course, I moved in, I'm not fully unpacked, but I'm not proud of the record keeping, no.
Any other questions? Peg.
You don't have to answer this, but it's something that I have thought of and I keep over the years. I believe that you are 3 years younger than my mother, which would have meant you graduated sometime around 1936 from high school, college sometime around 1940, give or take a year. And this is important to me because it puts me personally with where you were at a different time. And I've done it ever since I've known you, I guess because your age is so close to my mom's. And I just, it makes me feel a little bit a part of your story, and I like that.
If we translate, I'm sorry, kids. My ears are on strike, and they get hearing aids and everything. But sometimes the room, the size of the room, everything, you know how that is. So
You were born in 1920.
yes,
Okay, which means, when did you graduate from high school? What about college? Just a timeline of life's events.
well, 8 years in grade school. What is that? Starting when I was 5. I don't know. I can't work out the timeline without a piece of paper. But I'll tell you, it just went straight through, you know. Got out of college. I had 2 degrees. One was teaching and one was BA. And I did the little theater. I was about 21. See, that stuff goes through your teens. And I was about 21 when I cut loose and went. We can work it out sometime if you want to.
Kim?
She can hear with the microphone. I'm wondering, my husband was in politics for years, and they brought a senior citizen who was well over 90 years old to the elementary school to vote one day, and she was asked, so I'm going to ask you the same question, without being too political for you, who was your favorite president?
Who was my favorite?
President of the United States.
I think Teddy Roosevelt.
Mrs.
Well-
Thunberg's answer was, well, you know, I kind of like that actor guy. Ronald Reagan.
Well, you know, he started as such a spindly little kid that wasn't an athletic type, and he forced himself to become quite a tiger physically. And then he had a great deal of independence, and I think he didn't fool around. He said what he said, and he meant what he said. It seemed from the picture we have had of him. And then he went west, and the man of his girth and his reputation, he didn't hesitate to get on the horse and do what the guys did out there. I thought he was a very accomplished and very rounded and very real person. And that's why I always have liked him.
Very good, very good choice, Grace. And I think I'd like to ask you to please
Who
help
was
me.
your favorite? Who was your favorite president?
I think Lyndon B. Johnson took up the helm when we were all so crushed with John Kennedy dying, but I was also so impressed that he didn't run again when he could have, because he was a president that knew when to say enough.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be nice if we had a few who knew when to say when? So please,
Yeah,
let's,
thank you.
Asking me.
Yeah.
let's thank Grace again for her presentation.